John Callahan lived alone on the edge of a quiet frontier world. His farm stretched wide, but it felt empty. The soil was hard, the machines old, and the nights too silent. Once, long ago, this land had been alive with voices, his wife humming while she cooked, his children running across the fields, laughter echoing through the barn. But those days had passed, and now John was just an old human rancher, tending crops no one cared about, on a planet most people forgot. The galaxy had moved on. Humans were scattered thin across the stars, and John rarely saw another of his kind. He told himself he was fine. He told himself that the quiet was peace. But deep inside, he felt the truth. He was lonely. Too many nights he sat by the fire, staring at the empty chair across from him, wishing someone would sit there again. Sometimes John thought about sending a message to his grown children, who lived light years away. But what would he say? I miss you. I feel old. I don't know what to do with myself. No, he couldn't bring himself to send such words. He didn't want to burden them, so instead, he let the distance grow. Each morning, John woke before sunrise, fixed fences, checked water lines, and fed the animals. Work kept him moving, but it didn't stop the silence. He spoke to the machines, to the crops, even to the sky, but never to another person. The man who once raised a family, who once dreamed of building something lasting, now lived as if the galaxy had forgotten him, and he believed his life was nearly over. One evening, as the suns dipped low and the land glowed red, John noticed a dust cloud rising on the horizon. He frowned, wiping sweat from his brow. Visitors were rare out here. He reached for his old rifle, more out of habit than fear, and waited by the gate. The cloud grew larger, and soon he saw them, figures walking in formation, tall and proud. 11 of them. At first he thought they were soldiers, maybe raiders, come to take what little he had. But as they came closer, he saw their faces and his breath caught. They were women, alien women, each of a different kind, tall insectoid, scaled reptilian, feathered avian, and more. Their eyes held something fierce, yet heavy, as though they had carried grief for too long. The tallest stepped forward, her skin shimmering like glass under the setting sun. She bowed deeply and spoke in clear words. "You are John Callahan?" John hesitated. "I suppose I am. Who are you?" The women exchanged glances. Then, as if rehearsed, all 11 bowed together and said the same word. "Husband." John nearly dropped his rifle. "Husband? Now hold on. What in the blazes are you talking about?" The glass-skinned woman straightened, her expression calm, but firm. "We are widows. Our mates fell in the Great War when humans fought beside our people. By ancient pact, we were promised to surviving human men, so that the bond between species would not be broken. You, John Callahan, are one of the last." John blinked, trying to make sense of the words. Widows? Promised? Husband? He wanted to laugh, but their eyes were so serious that the sound caught in his throat. "You've got the wrong man," he said at last. "I'm just a farmer. I don't need wives. I don't need anyone." The women did not move. The silence pressed heavy. Then one, a smaller figure with feathered hair, stepped forward. Her voice trembled. "We have nowhere else to go. Our families are gone. Our homes destroyed. You are human. That is enough." John's heart tightened. He saw the pain in their faces, the weight they carried. For years, he had thought he was alone in his sorrow, but here stood 11 others, carrying loss as heavy as his own. And for the first time in a long while, John felt something stir inside him. Connection. That night, he let them stay in the barn. He told himself it was just for one night, just until they could find somewhere else. But as he sat by his fire, listening to the sound of their voices drifting through the walls, John realized the silence was broken. The empty chair across from him no longer seemed so empty. He thought of his wife, of how she would have smiled at the sight of strangers being given shelter. He thought of his children, of the bonds that distance had stretched but never truly broken. Maybe he had been wrong. Maybe life wasn't over. Maybe this was a beginning. As dawn rose, John stood outside the barn, waiting. One by one, the widows stepped out, greeting the new day. They looked at him with expectation, with trust, as if they already belonged here. John rubbed the back of his neck. I don't know what you're all expecting from me. I ain't no hero, and I sure ain't the man I used to be. The glass-skinned woman met his eyes. You are human. That is enough. For years, John had thought humanity was forgotten. But standing there, with 11 alien widows calling him husband, he realized something important. Humanity wasn't just about war or power. It was about connection, about giving others a reason to keep going even when the world seemed empty. John took a deep breath, the morning air sharp in his lungs. Maybe he didn't know what the future held. Maybe he was still afraid of being needed again. But one thing was certain. He was not alone anymore. The ranch felt different with 11 voices filling the air. Where there had once been silence, now there was chatter, laughter, and even arguments in strange tongues. The barn that had stood empty for years now glowed with firelight at night. John Callahan should have felt comforted by it, but he didn't. Not yet. He sat on the porch one evening, the wooden chair creaking under his weight, and watched the suns sink into the horizon. He could hear the widows inside, talking together, sharing stories from their worlds. But their words felt distant, like music from another room. John held his mug of coffee and stared at the sky. He thought of his wife. He thought of his children. They had all moved on. His wife was gone, and his children had drifted light years away to live their own lives. They sent a message now, and then, but words in a message didn't warm the heart the same way a real voice did. He felt a familiar ache in his chest. They're gone, John. You're alone. That was the thought he had carried for years. And even now, with 11 women under his roof, that feeling of distance clung to him. The widows noticed his silence. On the third night, the one with feathers in her hair approached him. She was small compared to the others, with sharp eyes like a hawk. She sat across from him without asking. You do not speak much, she said softly. John gave a small shrug. Never was a talker. That is not true, she replied, surprising him. We hear you at night. You talk to yourself when you think no one is listening. You say names. John froze. He hadn't realized they had heard him. Sometimes when the loneliness was too much, he whispered his wife's name or his children's. He gripped his mug tighter. They're far away, he admitted at last. Too far. I don't know how to reach them anymore. The widow tilted her head. Then call louder. Her words were simple, but they struck deep. John had spent so long believing distance was final, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe he could reach out again, even if he didn't know how. The next day, the widows worked beside him in the fields. The tall reptilian woman carried heavy beams with ease. The glass-skinned one repaired a water pump, with careful hands. The feathered widow herded animals with sharp whistles. John watched them work and felt something stir inside him. These women had lost everything, their homes, their families, their mates. Yet here they were, rebuilding, working with stubborn determination. At lunch, when they gathered under the shade, John asked them a question. Why me? Why come all this way for an old rancher? There's nothing here but dust and fences. The glass-skinned woman answered. Our mates died in the Great War. Humans stood beside us then. Your kind promised that we would not be left alone. We are widows, but widows need a bond, or the grief will swallow us. You are human. That is enough. John shook his head. Ain't enough. I can't give you back what you lost. The reptilian woman leaned forward, her eyes fierce. No one can, but you can give us tomorrow. That is all we ask. John stared at them, and in that moment, he saw the truth. They weren't here because they wanted a husband in the way he once had been to his wife. They were here because they needed hope. They needed a reason to stand up each day just as he did, and maybe, just maybe, they could find that reason together. That night, John tried something he hadn't done in years. He sat at the old comm station in his house, its lights dim from dust and disuse. He stared at the screen for a long time, then began to type a message to his daughter. "Sarah, it's your father. I know it's been a while. I wanted to say I'm still here. I've got some new company. Strange company. I don't know what to do, but I thought you should know." His finger hovered over the send button. Fear tightened in his chest. What if she didn't answer? What if she had moved on so far that she didn't care anymore? He didn't send the message. He shut the screen off and sat in the dark. But the important thing was, he had tried. For the first time in years, he had tried. The widows noticed the change. In the following days, John spoke a little more. He told them stories of Earth, about rivers that ran for miles, about trees so tall they touched the sky, about fields of wheat that glowed golden under the sun. The widows listened with wide eyes. To them, Earth was a legend, a world they had only read about. "You miss it," one of them said. John nodded slowly. "Every day. But Earth is gone to me. Too far away, now." The feathered widow placed her hand on his arm. Not gone, only waiting. Her words echoed in his mind long after. One evening, as the stars filled the sky, John sat again on the porch. The widows joined him, one by one, until all 11 sat around him in silence. For the first time, he did not feel like a stranger among them. He felt part of something. He still felt the distance from his children, from his wife's memory, from the life he had lost. That distance would never fully go away. But maybe he didn't need to erase it. Maybe he just needed to build something new, across it. He looked at the widows, each scarred by loss, each stubborn enough to still hope, and he thought, maybe humanity wasn't finished. Maybe as long as one human could offer tomorrow, even an old rancher like him, there was still something worth holding on to. John leaned back in his chair, listening to the quiet voices around him. For the first time in years, the silence did not hurt, because the silence was no longer empty. The ranch had not seen this much noise in years. Where once there was silence, now there were arguments over cooking, songs in alien voices, and even the clatter of broken tools as someone tried to fix something in their own way. John Callahan, who had lived alone for so long, didn't know whether to laugh or groan. 11 alien widows under one roof was not peaceful. It was chaos. One morning, he woke to the smell of something burning. He rushed into the kitchen to find the feather-haired widow standing over the stove. Wings spread wide in frustration. "I tried to make your food," she explained, holding up a blackened pan. "But human fire is too hot." John coughed, waving away the smoke. "That's because you put oil on a dry pan and turned the heat all the way up. You're supposed to be patient." The widow frowned. "Patience is not my strength." John chuckled. "Well, it's mine. Guess I'll teach you." But not everything was so simple. The reptilian widow preferred to sharpen blades late into the night, the sound scraping against stone until John's teeth hurt. The glass-skinned one arranged the furniture 3 different times in a single week, never satisfied with where things were placed. The insectoid widow had a habit of humming low, vibrating tones that rattled the windows. At first, John thought he might lose his mind. He had lived too long with silence, and the constant clamor left him exhausted. Yet, as the days passed, he realized something surprising. He didn't feel lonely anymore. The house was messy, but it was alive. Still, John carried the ache of distance in his heart. Each evening when the widows gathered together, he often slipped outside to sit alone on the porch. He would look at the stars and think about his children. He imagined them on their own distant worlds, raising families of their own, too far away to visit. He wondered if they ever thought of him, or if he had become just a memory. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to send them a message, but the words never came. How could he explain his life now? "Hello, it's your father. I live with 11 alien widows who call me husband." It sounded foolish even in his own mind. and so he stayed silent, carrying the sadness in his chest like a stone. The widows noticed his mood. One evening, the glass-skinned widow sat beside him. Her surface shimmered faintly in the moonlight, reflecting his weary face. "You are distant from us," she said simply. John sighed. "I ain't trying to be. I'm just old, set in my ways." She tilted her head. "Not old, just afraid." Her words struck him hard. Afraid. That was the truth. Afraid of being close, afraid of losing again, afraid of hoping. John rubbed his face with his hands. "I don't know how to do this anymore. How to care for people, how to let people in." The widow reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You do not need to know, you only need to try, that is enough." The next day, John tried. When the reptilian widow argued with the feathered one about who should herd the animals, John didn't walk away like he usually did. Instead, he stepped between them, listened to both sides, and suggested they work together. To his surprise, they agreed. When the insectoid widow hummed so loudly that the walls shook, John didn't complain. Instead, he asked her to hum softer and teach him the meaning of her songs. She smiled for the first time, a strange, sharp smile, and explained that her people used humming to share memories. When the glass-skinned widow rearranged the chairs for the fourth time, John helped her lift them, grumbling but secretly amused. Slowly, he began to feel less like an outsider in his own home, but the sadness still came at night. One evening, John sat again at the comm station. His finger hovered over the screen. He wanted to send a message to his daughter, Sarah, more than anything. He wanted to tell her about the chaos, the laughter, the strange meals, the arguments that turned into laughter again. He wanted to say that he wasn't as alone as he had once been, but the words felt stuck. He typed and deleted, typed and deleted. In the end, he shut the machine off once more. He leaned back in his chair and muttered, "Maybe tomorrow." These widows did not push him, but they stayed close. The feathered widow began bringing him tea in the evenings. The reptilian one sharpened tools for the ranch instead of only her weapons. The glass-skinned one asked him to teach her about planting, and together they knelt in the soil as he explained how to care for seeds. They did not erase the distance he felt from his children, but they softened it. For the first time in many years, John began to feel like he belonged to something again. One night, as the stars shone bright above, John sat surrounded by the widows. They sang in their many voices, a strange mix of tones, clicks, and whistles. It should have sounded harsh, but instead it felt like harmony. John closed his eyes, letting the sound wash over him. And he thought, maybe he didn't need to erase the past. Maybe he didn't need to forget the people who had moved away. Maybe the answer was simpler. Maybe he just needed to open his heart to the ones who were here now. And maybe, one day, that courage would give him the strength to reach out across the stars again. That night, as he lay in bed, John whispered into the darkness, "I'm still here, still trying." Life on the ranch had begun to feel alive again, but peace never lasts long on the frontier. One hot afternoon, John Callahan stood by the fence, wiping sweat from his brow. He had just finished repairing a broken line when he noticed dust rising on the horizon. At first, he thought it was just a trading caravan passing by, but as the cloud grew thicker, he saw dark shapes riding speeders moving fast toward the ranch. His stomach sank. Raiders. For years, the ranch had been too empty to draw trouble. No one bothered robbing an old man with nothing but tired crops and rusting machines. But now, with 11 widows under his roof and life filling the land again, maybe the ranch looked worth taking. John's hands tightened on his wrench. Inside the house, the widows felt it too. The feathered one came rushing to him, eyes sharp. "Strangers," she said. "They carry weapons." John gave a grim nod. "I know. Raiders. Best stay inside." But the widows did not move. The reptilian one hissed, baring her sharp teeth. The glass-skinned woman picked up a heavy tool like a staff. One by one, they prepared themselves. John frowned. "You're not soldiers anymore. You don't have to fight." The reptilian widow looked at him with fire in her eyes. We are widows. We have lost everything once. We will not lose again. The raiders arrived in a roar of engines. Dust swirled as a dozen rough-looking figures dismounted, armed with blasters and blades. Their leader, a scarred alien with jagged horns, stepped forward. Well, well, the raider sneered. What do we have here? An old human with a farm and wives? 11 of them? Looks like fortune finally smiled on us. John stood his ground, though his heart pounded. This is my land, you best turn around. The raider laughed. Or what? You'll hit me with that wrench? Step aside, old man. We'll take what we want. Before John could answer, the widows stepped out from the house. The feathered one raised her bow, arrows glowing with strange energy. The reptilian widow unsheathed twin blades that gleamed in the sun. The insectoid hummed low, a battle song that made the raiders shift uneasily. The leader blinked, surprised. Widows, you brought warriors here? John's voice was steady, though inside he shook. Not warriors. Family. The raiders charged. The fight was swift and fierce. The widows moved with precision, each one protecting the other. The reptilian cut through blades with raw strength. The feathered widow loosed arrows that struck true, sending raiders scattering. The glass-skinned one deflected blows with her shimmering body, protecting John when a raider rushed him. John himself grabbed an old rifle he had not touched in years. His hands shook, but his aim was steady. He fired warning shots, forcing raiders to scatter. He was no soldier, but he was human, and humans had always known how to stand their ground. When the dust cleared, the raiders were retreating, leaving their wounded behind. The leader glared at John. This isn't over, old man, he spat before fleeing into the horizon. The ranch was quiet again, except for the heavy breathing of those who remained. John lowered his rifle, staring at the widows. They were bruised, scratched but standing tall. His chest swelled with pride and guilt. You could have been killed, he said. The reptilian widow wiped her blade clean. So could you. But you did not run. The feathered widow placed her hand on his arm. You stood with us, that is enough. John swallowed hard. He felt the weight of their trust heavier than any weapon. For so long he had believed his life was over, that he had nothing left to give. But today, when trouble came knocking, he had stood with them. Not as a hero, not as a soldier, just as a man who refused to let hope be stolen again. That night, as they gathered around the fire, the widows sang softly to heal their fear. John sat among them, still shaken. He thought again of his children light years away. Did they know he still had fight left in him? Did they believe he had already grown too old, too tired? The distance between them felt sharper than ever. He wanted to reach out. He wanted to tell them, I'm still here, I'm still fighting. But when he sat again at the comm station, the words failed him. His fingers hovered over the screen, and once again he shut it off. He sighed deeply. I just don't know how to say it. Behind him, the glass-skinned widow spoke softly. Say it the same way you said it today. Stand. That is enough. John realized then that maybe words didn't always carry the weight he wanted. Maybe connection wasn't always about what you said. Sometimes it was about showing up. Sometimes it was about refusing to give up, even when it hurt. That was humanity's strength. Not power, not weapons. Just the stubborn will to keep standing, even when the galaxy tried to knock them down. John looked around at the widows, scarred but smiling, tired but alive. He felt the ache of distance from his children, but also a spark of hope. If he could stand here with these women, if he could protect them and build something new, maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to bridge the distance with his family, too. One step at a time. That night, for the first time in years, John dreamed not of endings, but of beginnings. After the raiders fled, the ranch seemed peaceful again. The suns rose over the fields, painting the land in gold. Birds sang. The crops swayed gently in the wind, but inside John Callahan a storm raged. He had fought. He had survived. He had stood beside the widows, showing them that he would not let harm touch them. And yet, the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on him. For years, John had lived alone. Life had been simple. He tended crops, repaired machines, and lived quietly, thinking he had nothing left to care for. But now, 11 lives rested partly in his hands. They had come to him trusting him, not just to feed them or give them shelter, but to be their anchor in a universe that had broken them. He was an old man, tired from years of solitude, yet the universe demanded more of him than ever before. That morning, he walked through the fields with the widows following him. Each carried tools, seeds, or water. They had patched up the fences, repaired the barn, and even planted new crops. John had watched silently at first, unsure how to guide them. "You're too rough with the soil," he said to the insectoid widow who was digging a hole far too deep for the seed. "You'll crush it." She paused and looked at him, unsure. "I want to help." "And you will," John said gently. "But let me show you first." He bent down, fingers working through the dirt, showing her how to plant the seed gently, how to cover it with care. She mimicked his motions, and together, they planted rows that might grow strong enough to feed them all. Watching her, John thought about his children. How many times had he shown them small things, guiding their hands with patience? Distance now separated them, but the memory of teaching them made him hopeful. Perhaps he could still guide lives, even if not his own children. The day passed with work, chatter, and quiet moments. But as evening fell, the old ache returned. He sat on the porch, watching the suns dip behind the mountains. The widows had gone inside to cook, and the ranch was quiet again. He reached for the comm station, fingers trembling. Another message, for his children. Another attempt to reconnect. "I'm still here. I fought today and we are safe. I wish you could see this. I wish I could share it with you." He paused. Words always failed him at the last moment. How could he explain 11 alien widows calling him husband? How could he tell them about the battle with raiders? About the hope he felt in their eyes? He let the message go unsent. Instead, he breathed deeply and reminded himself that connection did not always need words. Sometimes it was in action, in standing firm, in being present. The widows came out again, carrying lanterns. They noticed his thoughtful look. "You worry too much," the glass-skinned widow said. "You carry all burdens alone." "I ain't used to carrying others," John admitted. "I've been alone too long. I don't know how to do it right." The feathered widow approached him slowly. "You already do it right. You do not run from danger. You care. That is enough." John looked at them, and a small smile appeared. For the first time, he did not feel the crushing loneliness. He felt purpose. He realized something important. The distance he felt from his children was still there, but he could still be a man worth trusting. He could still teach, still protect, still connect. That was human strength. Over the next few days, John grew into his role. He woke earlier to check water supplies. He fixed broken fences with the widows at his side, and he even began teaching them small human traditions. He showed them how to bake bread slowly over a fire, how to care for animals with patience, how to watch the skies and know the weather by the color of clouds. The widows listened eagerly, learning quickly, and in return they shared their own knowledge. Insectoid patterns for irrigation, glass-skinned energy storage techniques, feathered methods for reading the wind. Together they combined human and alien ways, creating a farm stronger than it had ever been. John realized he was not just surviving anymore. He was leading, and he was not leading as a hero or a soldier, but as a human who refused to give up. Evenings brought quiet reflection. John often sat alone, thinking of his children and the distance between them. He imagined sending messages again, telling them about his life now, about the widows, about the farm, about the tiny victories every day. But even if he could not reach them yet, he could still build bonds here. He could be present for those who trusted him. That was enough for now. Hope began to grow slowly. The ache of distance softened when he realized that being human meant connecting wherever possible, and that one act of care could echo farther than he knew. One night, after the widows had gone to sleep, John walked through the fields under the stars. He touched the crops, checked the fences, and stopped at the old barn. Memories of his wife, of his children playing in the hay, filled him. He whispered into the night, "I'm still here. I will keep going. I will protect what matters." And, for the first time, he felt lighter, not because the sadness had vanished, but because he had hope. The weight of responsibility was heavy, yes, but it reminded him that he was still alive, still human, still capable of connection. Even from a distance, he could reach out, one small step at a time. The widows, sleeping inside, dreamed of safety. The farm, once empty and silent, hummed with life. And John, the old human rancher who had thought life was over, realized something important. The universe had not forgotten him yet. He was not alone. Not anymore. And that was worth everything. John Callahan never thought his quiet days on the ranch would bring him fame or trouble. He was just a human, living out his final years with crops, animals, and 11 alien widows who had slowly become his family. Yet the universe had other plans. One morning, as he repaired a broken water line, a sleek council ship descended onto the ranch. Its surface gleamed under the suns, and its landing thrusters kicked up dust that swirled around his boots. The widows gathered behind him, curious but wary. A voice came through the ship's speakers. "John Callahan, you are summoned to the Galactic Council. You have violated no known law, but your actions have drawn attention. Compliance is required." John rubbed his face. "Summoned? For what?" "I'm just a rancher." The glass-skinned widow stepped forward. "They do not understand your actions yet. They fear what humans can do when united." John swallowed. Fear crept in, not for himself, but for the widows. "I can't leave them alone here," he muttered. "They will survive," the feathered widow said softly. "You have taught them well, and you have taught yourself. That is why they summoned you." John boarded the ship reluctantly, with the 11 widows following. Inside, the council chamber was massive, alien and intimidating. Representatives of dozens of species surrounded a central platform. John felt small, out of place, but he held his head high. The council leader, a tall being with multiple eyes and tentacles, spoke first. "John Callahan, humans have long been scattered across the galaxy. You, one of the last of your kind, have united alien widows under your protection. This family is unprecedented. Explain yourself." John took a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "I did what any human would do. These women were lost, alone. They trusted me. I gave them a place to live, a reason to hope, and I stood by them when danger came. That is all." A murmur passed through the council. Many seemed skeptical, some even amused. The council leader's voice was sharp. "You could have caused chaos. You could have angered nations. You are one man. Why should humanity interfere in our affairs?" John's heart ached. He thought of his children, far away, and of all the humans scattered across the stars. Humanity had been underestimated for centuries, dismissed as weak or reckless. And yet humans had survived disasters, wars, and distance to still stand. He lifted his chin. "Because humans endure, not because we are the strongest, but because we care. We fight for what matters, even when it seems impossible. These women, these widows, had nowhere else. I could not turn away, and I do not regret it. That is what humanity does. That is who we are." The chamber went silent. The council members whispered among themselves. Some seemed moved, others skeptical. The glass-skinned widow stepped beside John. She raised her voice so the council could hear. "He speaks the truth. He did not seek glory or power. He only sought to give us hope. That is worth more than all the laws you enforce. The tentacled leader's many eyes fixed on John. And what of the danger you brought to yourself and your wards? What if raiders or warlords attacked? John looked down at his hands, thinking of the recent raid. I do not know the future. I only know what I must do today. If I can protect those who trust me even a little, then I must try. That is human strength. Not perfect, not invincible, but stubborn. We endure. We hope. And we act. The council deliberated for what felt like hours. John stood silently, thinking of his children. He wanted to send them a message, to tell them he was still alive, still standing, still human. But the comms were sealed on the council floor. For now, all he could do was show his character with actions and words. Finally, the leader spoke. John Callahan, your actions are unorthodox, but they are commendable. You have demonstrated qualities not only of humans, but of all who seek to protect life. We will allow your family to remain on the ranch under your guidance, and we will consider your example for future interspecies relations. Relief flooded through John. He had not only defended the widows, he had defended humanity's reputation. Back on the ranch, as the council ship disappeared into the sky, John walked slowly through the fields. The widows followed, their expressions tired but happy. The suns were setting, casting long shadows across the crops. He thought again of his children. They were still far away, still distant, but he felt something shift inside him. Distance could not erase hope. Distance could not erase connection. One day he would reach out to them. He would share this story, this life, and show them that humanity endured, even in the quiet corners of the galaxy. He knelt in the soil and touched the crops, feeling their life beneath his fingers. We will grow together, he whispered. We will endure. The widows gathered around him, leaning on him, trusting him, looking to him for guidance. John smiled for the first time in weeks. The ranch was more than a home now. It was a testament to what humans could do. Connect across differences, care in the face of danger, and build hope when the world seemed empty. That night, John sat outside under the stars. The widows slept nearby. He thought about the galactic council, about his distant children, and about the life he had thought was over. I'm still here, he whispered to the stars. I'm still trying. I'm still human. And that is enough. For the first time, John felt the true weight of hope. Distance could not break bonds that were built on trust, courage, and care. Humanity endured, not because of weapons or numbers or power, but because humans refused to give up on one another even when the galaxy tried to forget them. And John Callahan, the old human rancher, had learned that lesson well.